I will say that this work is not necessarily on what I presented on in Greece this summer, but it's a newer work that I am working on for my dissertation research. And you will be the first to hear a track that I produced myself, or I co-produced with a lot of help and friends, about how we can better listen to the Neptunes music and Black and Filipino musical collaboration. So I'll begin now. The Neptunes' influence resonates like tuning into a radio, shaping other artists, like younger artists like Mind Design, Tyler the Creator, Bobby Earth, Emma V, Varnish-La Pessin, Sid and Matt Martians, Chet Hugo's and Pharrell Williams' nerd aesthetic and marching band work ethic broadcast through airwaves around the globe, leaving an indelible mark on these artists and those yet to be discovered. However, time and time again, the narrative that Pharrell Williams is the most creative and thus the most important to the creation of the Neptunes' success is exposed before audiences. He rejects the notion with hints of embarrassment at such an inaccurate assumption. This happened during his interview at the Breakfast Club radio show during a press run for the Hidden Figures movie in 2016. Around 28 minutes, host Charlemagne the God asked Williams about updates about the other members of NERD. Let us listen to how he speaks about Chad.
Do you run things by him or?
Whenever he wants, man. You know what it is? I let him do things on his time whenever I don't let him do anything. I'm just happy to collaborate whenever he's really ready to do it. He's a genius.
Was it always planned for you to be like the Beyonce of nerd? Like,
that was weird.
No, I'm saying, you know what I meant by that. See, there you go that's the gender thing. Beyonce's bigger than gender.
She's Beyonce.
Exactly. That's a compliment.
It is, but but when the point was pointing me out to be that makes me feel awkward. I'm everybody.
You're not Michelle. Stop it.
So this awkward moment was smoothed over with smiles, but it exemplifies how fans' fictions of their favorite artist's musical process assumes each person's importance and contributions to the tracks that they love are not always based in fact. Chad Hugo's involvement with the group causes a bit of anxiety for both fans and listeners. Upon first sight, people can't easily place him into a racial category. And in the US South, that is a critical moment that constantly plays out in one's day-to-day. In the South, it's always important for people to know who your people are without much thought. For one's life and family history to be considered in this region of the country is both an ethic of care and a marker of community. And our racial discourse in the US often does not hold space for nuance, let alone histories that exist outside of white and Black binaries of revolutionary and civil wars. Belief in the idea that Pharrell Williams is the heart and soul of the Neptunes misconstrues the intimate process that these two men use when making music together and with other prominent artists around the globe. It denies how Chad Hugo's musical expression allows a Neptunes beat to arrest the attention of the unsuspecting listener and maintain a distinguishable sound from many other record producers. Additionally, writing about Hugo's and Williams's record production as a hierarchy of personnel continues the erasure of Filipino Americans musicians from the popular music soundscape and builds pressure onto Hugo to bear what Christine Barcareza Balance names as a constricting burden of representation placed on Filipino American performers. Now, Afro-Filipino futurism, it represents the Neptunes. We do not read images like that on the right side of the screen as a negation of Hugo's worth. Questions such as, what is your honest opinion of these two? Do not beg answers like, quote, they're called the Neptunes, not the Pharrells, end quote, or, quote, much props, very original style, they made an impact on hip hop for sure. Chad should get just as much credit as Pharrell gets, but people act like he doesn't exist, end quote. Certain listeners place an expectation on Hugo to sound his Filipino-ness in a manner that's legible to the framework shaping American racial discourse, while simultaneously building a parasocial narrative about Pharrell Williams' importance to what works in their music. In this paper, I traced Chet Hugo's and Pharrell Williams' friendship and musicianship as a production duo of the Neptunes. I show how the Neptunes' work are grounded in what Elliot H. Powell theorizes as the other side of musical collaboration and the synthetic sounds of music recording technology and a marching band work ethic. Their cultural productions present a distinct form of Afro-Filipino musical collaboration to listeners. Together, we will listen to the lore of the Neptunes, their suburban memories of the Tidewater area in Hampton Roads, Virginia, and a story about Afro-Filipino futurist intimacies in marching bands. Differences in marching band styles abound. Bill Moffat's text, The Patterns of Motion, carved a path for band directors to arrange music in complex symmetrical field formations. Moffat's theories on band ensembles established the drum corps style that bands at predominantly white institutions, such as Ohio State University and the University of Michigan, use today. In the 1970s, Dr. William P. Foster expanded upon Moffat's principles to create the show style marching, which is used in historically Black colleges and universities and their marching band programs. In show style marching, you are likely to see more pageantry and theatrics of dancers and dance lines, and more use of instruments, extreme registers, and moments where performers sing gospel renditions during performance. In current times, band programs across the country dip in and out of these two traditions, mixing marching band styles, traditional songs, stand tunes, and more. In the case of the Neptunes' beginnings, public and private spaces included marching band rehearsals, field shows, and concerts, and Chad Hugo's childhood bedroom in the attic of his parents' home in Kempsville, Virginia. Edwina Berjano, a Tidewater area businesswoman and local tita, states, quote, "The main focus of developing the culture is family. In the Filipino community, family is more than kinship. It is everyone working together to ensure that no one goes without," end quote. In an interview about the Neptunes' origin story, rapper Gene No Malice Thornton of the Clips mentions Chad Hugo's family and their home playing an essential role to their success. Thornton says, quote, "I clearly remember how nurturing Chad's parents were to what we were doing. Anytime we would come to their house, they would open the door and let us in upstairs. They knew what we were there for, and what they did was so crucial for us to becoming who we are and the contributions we made to this music game. That is something that people will never see or hear about, but I'm here to tell you firsthand that without them, none of this would have been possible," end quote. So let's set the scene. Hugo's and Williams's relationship starts as seventh graders and middle school marching band. Although they lived 2 miles apart and went to different schools, they met through a multi-city band program in the Tidewater area. That first day of band camp, Chad was nervous about fitting in with the hundreds of other band kids. Being one of the few Filipino students in the music ensemble meant being mentally prepared to be asked, quote, "Where are you really from?" end quote. In contrast, Pharrell was preoccupied with memories of his grandma Lucille's funeral while counting measures of rest and rehearsal. Pharrell remembers their meeting on his track Best Friend between the sounds of synth horns, emphasizing crashing cymbals and descending bass drum lines.
Grade, it was cursed and sad, but the gift within it is when I first met Chad. But even Chad could tell you that my Christmas was jinxed, cause Grandma Lucille died on 12/19. I can't help but wonder what kind of black cloud I was under, cause 15 years later the other died. Best friend told me, bummer, yeah, I can tough, that's fine. But the weight of the world could really crush one's mind. So let it out, P. Let it out, P. Let it out, P. Let it out, P.
Luckily, the lunch break came quick, and the two found themselves seated across one another at the lunch table.
Yo, I go by the name of Pharrell from the Neptunes.
The cafeteria lunch table is a prime site for their infamous beat featured in the Clips' hit song Grindin' and has been preserved by generations of band kids for decades to come. Imagine across this lunch table, Hugo strikes up a conversation about some nani-ish. Do you know that show, Mork and Mindy? Using the fundamentals Hugo learned on the saxophone and Williams on the bass drum, the two began experimenting at Chad family's home and on Williams' Gemini mixer, drum sets, and guitars. As the young boys grew into teenagers, they collected memories that Hugo and Williams would invite other artists and eventually listeners into to experience their world. When Chad got his own car at 16, he would pick Pharrell up from school to go to his house to listen to William's parents' tapes of Parliament Funkadelic, Brothers Johnson, Earth, Wind and Fire, and sample a few bars from it. Let's hear from Chad's own words about how this process began.
We wouldn't sample and make the beat off it. We would actually listen to that groove over and over again to try to emulate that feeling. We would listen to it, and I would go with the keyboard and go and change the voice, flip it around, and I'll make it backwards, just whatever, to make it just different. And at the end of the day, it would sound totally different than what the idea we were listening to.
Taking Hugo's memories into account, their method is what I define as loop listening. This active listening is derived from the loop, or a form of music making in hip hop using samples to create a short musical idea, seemingly without listeners being able to tell where the melodic material begins or ends. It can be played indefinitely. This is a similar process that marching band arrangers use for their ensembles. Dr. Thomas L. Jones, Hampton University Director of Bands, says he listens to a song, quote, 50 to 100 times before I even start writing now. And I think for a lot of arrangers these days, this is partly because of the industry itself. The process goes, this song came out, gotta hurry up and write it, and then the kid has to play it before it's played out, end quote. Tiffany McClinton, a trombonist and former Bethune-Cookman marching band member, emphasized the role of the arranger, stating, quote, I think having a good arranger that's really going to pull out all the different pieces of a song and create that using live instruments will have you ask, what are those mellophones doing over there? And then you listen to it in your room and you're like, oh, that part really is in there, end quote. While in secondary school, Chad and Pharrell marched drum corps style, but Williams had experience watching HBCU bands like Norfolk State play. Yet all kinds of band students were affected by the marching band-based sounds that he and Chad would co-create.
I'll hear it, and I'll try to lace it. To me, I consider myself like a band, you know what I mean? Like, you got a song, let me be your band. I'll fill it in when I can.
On Twitter, a colleague mentioned the Neptunes hits in 2004 and 2005 had him feeling like he could take on the Third Reich and the rest of the world in his small marching band at a private liberal arts college. This knowledge of listening informs their production process and allows their music to get people moving to the sounds they set and splice on tracks. When the duo released their album, The Neptunes Present, in 2003, it was clear their loop listening paid off, ultimately leading to Pharrell Williams' first single as a solo artist. In Frontin', we hear a reimagination of Curtis Mayfield's Ride On for the Darkness. It only took the invention of advanced AI snitch machines to tell internet folks of social media what a male's bright falsetto and a strumming guitar riff can mean intergenerationally. Let's hear it together.
Sexy. Okay, yeah, that's a soft. Been waiting to get with you. Hey, yeah. Don't wanna sound full of myself or rude, but you ain't looking at no other dudes, 'cause you love me. I'm sorry, baby. So sexy.
The Neptunes name comes from their wonder of natural phenomena like the planets and the seas. For Rolling Stone, Matt Deal quotes Williams declaring, quote, we named ourselves the Neptunes because we wanted to be the kings of water, end quote. Like the bronze statue watching over Neptune's Park in Virginia Beach, the duo's desire was to become the kings of their craft, but with a mythological twist. Williams describes the duo's name further, saying, quote, 85% of your body is water. Everything travels through your body through electric current. And we were like, cool. Water's the best conductor in the world, so we'll be called the Neptunes, end quote. The end goal for them is for a track that they produce to move like the currents of electricity in your body, like how they do in the bodies of water on the earth. Their union is a lifelong interracial brotherhood, and is only one instance of both men's Afro-Asian musical collaborations. In his book, Manifest Technique, Mark R. Villegas states, Filipino Americans in the 1980s and 1990s became co-conspirators in hip hop because the genre offered public and private spaces to investigate their racial position in history and in the world, expanding the opportunities for practitioners to offer their own representation. Afro-Filipino futurism acknowledges the sciences and fictions that deny agency to Black Americans and Filipino Americans of their right to envision and sound and author their futures, past, and presents. This futurism holds the past events not simply as hurdles to overcome or burdens to lay down, but rather historic happenings that are approached with curiosity and an emotionally true vernacular reality. Staying true to feelings, no matter how pleasurable or maddening, and taking the liberty to find the fictive and historical facts are all actions that an Afro-Filipino futurist would use to reframe history and name their existence in the world. What is real and what is fictive does not sully the efforts of an Afro-Filipino futurist songwriter or producer. Flow in an artist's raps, timbre in a singer's chorus, and panning from ear to ear in overhead speakers blend to signify worlds with multiple temporal possibilities that listeners perform their own interpretations in discourse, critique, and in fan art. So here's my own Afro-Filipino futurist story.
I heard a legend once. Mary Toulousan told me about a time in the early 1900s when there was a Black man, Lieutenant Walter H. Loving, who led an all-Filipino marching band.
To know that the conductor of the Philippine Constabulary Band was an African-American officer in the early 1900s, I knew that there was a lot of significance there.
During the 1904 World's Fair, they played for white socialites looking to get a taste of the sounds and violent scenes of subjection of people denied their humanity from around the globe. I heard a tornado rolled through the World's Fair that day, and would you believe it? The lights went right out just as they were about to play. Pitch black. Damn. Deeply disturbed by silence and sharing the dark concert hall with little brown men holding piccolos, flutes, trumpets, and snares. The audience was scared. Some dared to sing Dixie, while others made requests to hear the Star Spangled. The PC band played a concert in the dark that day. Since then, the legend is told differently, all the way from the archipelago to the United States. In the future, when people struggle to understand that the Neptunes are not the Pharrells, we must offer up the nuances of interracial intimacies of marching bands, like that of Lieutenant Loving in the Philippine Constabulary Band. What intimacies are forged right on for and in the darkness? In the future of an Afro-Filipino world, would that band sound like voices singing gospel composer Richard Smallwood's lyrics to total praise and total darkness?
And then I'll hear it and I'll try to lace it. To me, I consider myself like a band, you know what I mean? Like, you got a song, you be your band.
Being in band was definitely a nerdier thing, but at the end of the day, you determine how nerdy you are.
And I would see Pharrell huddled up with his other drum players, and they were banging beats, boom.
And they had a really warm relationship. They respected Walter Loving very much, not because he was American, but because he was an amazing musician.
I'm unsure as to whether it's accurate to name Chad Hugo as Pharrell Williams' band. To sense the duo's musicianship requires an intentional listening based on the futuristic collage, honoring present and past. While listeners' definitions of the Neptunes are based on their own experiences with sound, one thing I do know is that the Neptunes band has been the best one around.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, yeah, thank you for the introduction, and I'm very happy to present.
this is a more, I guess, technical presentation, so I hope you, bear with me, and it's not too boring for some people. So this is part of what I presented in Thessaloniki, although I will go into a bit more detail on other aspects in this of this study. So I would like to start with a short background on interactions of fundamental frequency and spectral envelope, and the implication of the source filter model. Fundamental frequency and spectral envelope are critical acoustical features of harmonic sounds, and they essentially affect pitch and timbre perception. However, the distinctions between F0 and SE-based effects in auditory perception, they are hardly clear-cut. Perceptual studies have shown interference effects between pitch and auditory brightness perception, and also striking similarities between F0 and SE-based processing have been demonstrated in the processing of auditory sequences. Just popped a message, just want to check. Okay, sorry. Further acoustical analyses have shown substantial covariance between F0 and SE properties for most musical instruments. And so this comes now to the source filter model, because this directly contradicts this model of sound production, stating that F0 and SE properties, so fundamental frequency and spectral envelope properties, are relatively independent. And what does that mean? Well, here's a visualization of this concept, where you can see the spectral fine structure F0 indicated by the black vertical lines, which is shifted underneath the spectral envelope with a constant shape here in red. So you would just shift this F0 underneath this constant shape and would produce different tones based on the spectral envelope. In more recent theories of sound perception or sound source perception, constant SE shapes would distinguish different instrument classes, and a shift in F0 would result in different registers within a particular class. However, it's not entirely clear whether instrument class identity, as mediated by its associated timbre, is preserved by a constant SE shape, accompanied with shifts in F0. Moreover, even in the literature of speech perception, it has been argued that formant patterns or spectral shape are not sufficient to account for vowel perception. Thus, in the present study, I used an analysis by synthesis approach to parametrically control the covariance of F0 and SE in harmonic sounds to test for the perceptual role of congruency. By we, I mean with Kai Siebenburg, in our lab in Oldenburg. So let's begin with the methods, results, and discussions of the first experiment. In total, 1,900 recorded harmonic tones from 50 different sustained orchestral instruments taken from the Vienna Symphonic Library were analyzed at a playing level of mezzo forte, and the sounds had a nominal duration of 250 milliseconds with instrument-specific decay. After that, ERP frequency capsule coefficients, so they are closely connected to MEL frequency capsule coefficients, were computed from the sound's long-term spectra to capture modulations in the spectral envelope. And afterwards, principal component analysis was used for dimensionality reduction. And this resulted then in the first two dimensions, PC1 and PC2, explaining around 62% of the variance in the capsule coefficients 2 to 13. Why 2 to 13? Because the first coefficient is just the DC offsets, which would just scale the spectral envelope up or down, let's say, on the amplitude axis. So this was disregarded. From a preliminary correlation analysis, it became clear that the spectrocentroid in the instrument spectra negatively correlated with principal component 1. There was a weak correlation also with PC2, but it was in that sense irrelevant. And here you can see now the clusters for 12 exemplary instruments positioned along PC1 and PC2, and each dot corresponds to the spectral envelope statistics of a single note at a given pitch indicated by the color-coded fundamental frequency. And the gray dots show the entirety of all 1,900 analyzed sounds. So you can see that there are some instruments that cluster rather well, so for instance, the trombone. And then there are instruments, for example, the clarinet, which is all over the place, it seems. So for the resynthesis of the component space, and central to this investigation, 3 different congruency conditions were created. And yeah, so there was the congruent condition, which consisted of the original matched F0 and spectral envelope pairings. And then in an incongruent condition, F0 and SE were systematically mismatched by inverting the F0 distribution around the median F0 across the set of sounds. So here's a visualization of the original and the inverted distribution. And in this graph, there's the original distribution with low and high F0s, and underneath the inverted distribution. And then there's also the fixed condition where sounds across the component space were synthesized with a single F0 at the median F0 across the space. Furthermore, sounds were synthesized from 2 distinct regions of the component space. The inner space, which corresponds to the regions of the actual analyzed sounds, and the outer space, which corresponds to extrapolated regions beyond the analyzed range. Overall, we used synthetic sounds for more control over the covariance and also to avoid idiosyncratic features. So I can just now quickly play a couple of sounds that are rather crude, but so here's from the inner space of the original or the congruent condition. Play one more time. Oops, nope. I want to play one more time. And here one from the outer space. I will keep going. The experiment was conducted online via Testable, had overall 41 participants, and consisted of 29 online and 12 laboratory subjects, because the data acquisition was done in 2021 during the corona pandemic, and we used the laboratory results to validate online responses, and they were they matched in that sense. So for the entirety of the inner and outer space, participants had to rate the pleasantness ratings of sounds on a 6-point scale from very unpleasant to very pleasant, with no neutral response. Congruent and incongruent sounds were presented in random order in the same block, followed by the fixed condition. Then, after a short break, participants had to rate the brightness of these sounds from very dull to very bright for a subset of sounds along the first and second dimensions of the space. Prior to this, the participants were familiarized with the concept of auditory brightness by being presented intervals of filtered white noise, where high frequency energy content was increased stepwise. The ratings were then, afterwards range normalized for each participant to lie within the interval from 1 to 6. So here are the results for the pleasantness ratings across congruency condition, and divided into inner and outer space. The small markers represent average rating across participants for individual notes. So, there were no significant differences in sound pleasantness between the congruency conditions, although the congruent condition was rated most pleasant. However, there was a consistent effect of space with sounds from the outer space receiving lower ratings, lower pleasantness ratings. Diving into it a bit deeper, a relatively weak effect of congruency became visible in a post-hoc correlation analysis of incongruent sounds. So from the inner space here, these sounds, where pleasantness ratings decreased when the level of incongruency exceeded around 2 octaves. That was a weak correlation there. Now for the brightness ratings, and this is what I initially presented in Thessaloniki. Here the ratings, they are visualized along PC1. So that was the vertical axis in the first plot with the clusters, and PC2. Here the fixed condition, so this is the yellow curve, is of particular interest since the effects of F0 were controlled for. So the yellow markers, they followed a monotonically downwards trend, centered slightly off the 0 position of PC1. A strong negative Spearman correlation coefficient and results from a linear mixed effects model confirmed that there was a robust effect of PC1 on the brightness ratings. However, when we look at PC2, there was no effect of PC2 on the brightness ratings, at least for the controlled condition. Considering the conditions with variation in F0, there was a robust correlation between F0 and brightness ratings for both the congruent and the incongruent condition. And at the same time, the impact of PC1 is not limited to the fixed F0 condition, but also plays a pertinent role in the congruent and incongruent conditions, and also for PC2. So for this first experiment, overall, we saw a relatively weak congruency effect that only became clear above 2 octaves of separation between spectral envelope and F0. And more interestingly, sounds from outer parts of the space without direct correspondence to existing instruments were perceived as less pleasant. And we interpret these results as a mere exposure effect based on the presented spectral envelope statistics, which could be tied to cultural constraints in music perception. Lastly, and also importantly, brightness ratings were strongly affected by F0 cues, but this was, of course, has also already been shown in previous studies. So this brings me to the second experiment. In this experiment, we had a closer look at particular instruments, and we chose the violin, alto voice, clarinet, and tuba for our synthesis. Compared to the relatively coarse approximation of the spectral shapes in the first experiment, here individual instrument spectral envelopes were extracted using the so-called true envelope computation on the ERP filtered spectrum. And this resulted in a more detailed spectral modulation characteristic. So they more closely follow the spectral envelope of the instruments, or the spectrum. In total, 4 conditions were created. 3 of them consisted of partially incongruent sounds based on fixed SE shapes from the instrument's low, middle, and high registers. So here we have a sample of the spectral envelopes that are that occur in the low, middle, and high registers. And and these were called the low register spectral envelope, LRSE, and so on, MRSE and HRSE. And also as a control condition, the originally congruent spectral envelopes were used. The spectral envelopes were then, the spectral envelopes from all conditions were synthesized within a range of 19 pitches, equally spaced in major thirds from F#1 to F#7. So for the partially incongruent conditions, yeah, they would be sampled in the different registers, and the congruent condition would F0 and SE would differ all the time. This experiment was also done through Testable and had 38 participants, and they had at least 2 years of musical instrument training. Again, participants had to rate the sound pleasantness of the synthesized instrument sounds. Here, 4 instrument-specific sets in random order were presented, each containing randomized sounds from all conditions, and the name of the instruments corresponding to the sets were not given. Furthermore, sound plausibility ratings were collected, where participants had to rate the sound based on their internal reference of the particular instrument sounds on a scale from very implausible to very plausible. So in this condition, they were then told what these synthesized sounds should represent and accordingly should rate the plausibility. So here are the pleasantness ratings results. Concentrate on the upper panel here. So overall, the sound pleasantness ratings followed an inverted U shape centered around the middle of the global F0 range for the congruent, the low register and mid register spectral envelope conditions. In yellow, the high register spectral envelope condition showed a flattened response towards lower pitches, and thus an effective shift of its maximum towards higher pitches. This was seen in all instruments, but the tuba. Stronger local differences between conditions were seen in the clarinet and in the alto voice. So, for instance, comparing the congruent line in the clarinet, black line, with the blue line, which has a dip here. So most striking was this a decrease of the LRSE in the middle register of the clarinet. For all other instruments, the low register spectral envelope was actually on par with the congruent condition. The data were also analyzed using linear mixed effects models, and all instruments showed significant effects of pitch as quadratic terms. And for all instruments, except for the tuba, consistent effects of congruency were seen, as the congruent condition received the most pleasant ratings. The plausibility ratings here on the left show a slightly different picture. Average sound plausibility ratings are plotted over the instrument-specific register anchors, so low, mid, and high register anchors. And effects of the low register spectral envelope were not as strong as for the pleasantness ratings seen before. The congruent low register spectral envelope and mid register spectral envelope conditions were mostly rated similarly. Only in the clarinet you can see a slight lower pleasantness rating, as it was also seen for plausibility rating, as was also seen for the pleasantness ratings. And comparing the sound pleasantness and plausibility judgments, strong positive correlations were seen for alto voice and clarinet. Interestingly, tuba sounds showed a moderately negative correlation between the two judgments, and the regression for the violin sounds was sort of inconclusive. So for alto voice and clarinet, those judgments, had the same effect, or were correlated. So on a global level, pleasantness ratings followed an inverted U-shaped distribution for all instruments. Similar results were seen for sound preference ratings across global F0 for different instrument families by McAdams et al. In 2017. So that is rather interesting. And in our study, the global maximum in ratings was located around F#4. And this finding is particularly interesting since it has been shown that maximum tonus, which is a measure of pitch clarity, general sounds, including musical instruments, is evoked around the pitch of D4. And this is just a major third apart from the maximum pleasantness in our study. And this maximum also corresponds to the average musical pitch found in cross-cultural musical works. And a similar pitch was also found in, the average pitch about all, across all the sustained instruments that we analyzed. I will skip to my conclusions now because of time. So I will give you some take-home messages. Firstly, we interpret these results as evidence for a constrained codependence of F0 and spectral envelope statistics in the sensory evaluation of sounds that were synthesized along basic dimensions of acoustical instrument sounds. And furthermore, the first component of the spectral envelope space closely corresponded to brightness ratings, indicating a direct correspondence between the acoustical structure of natural sounds and an important facet of timbre perception. And lastly, the spectral modulation characteristics of selected instruments and the resulting perceptual ratings of spectral envelope and F0 interactions also highlight the limitations of the source filter model and may prompt reconsideration of its validity for our understanding of harmonic sounds. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready for questions.
And now for something completely different. I'm Jay. I use they, them pronouns, and I just want to acknowledge that we are on stolen land. I am a classically trained singer, but I'm not just interested in like traditional operatic sounds like the that we're used to hearing, but in all the things that voices can do, from like aggressive sounds and like growls and things like that, and how to do them healthfully and how to bring respect for these sounds into the academy, and how to use them, how to write them, how to orchestrate them. So this love of sounds has kind of led me into the study of psychoacoustics, which we define as the scientific study of sound perception. And we are really concerned also with differentiating the objective and the subjective, right? So we call A440 this note, and we pretend we know what A is, but the thing is 440 hertz, right? That's the objective, but then pitch, like a Baroque specialist will call it a B flat, and a mainstream person's going to call it A, and a classical person is going to call it like something in between, some weird out of tune quarter note, because they use 430. So, you know, it's important that to some extent, sorry, my thing flipped before I was ready, because my computer is possessed apparently. But also I want to point out that I am a racialized person. I'm non-binary, I'm neurodivergent, I'm trauma-informed voice teacher, and I work mainly with trans students. Some come to me because they want to learn to speak in a way that aligns with their gender presentation. And some are regular singers who just like the people you would meet at McGill, but they want to work in a school that is trans-informed and that is trauma-informed. I also work with a lot of neurodivergent students who couldn't quite fit into a regular voice studio in an academic environment because there isn't a lot of adaptability for people who learn in different ways, unfortunately. And I'm also a parent. So it's really important to me and crucial to me to see our world become sort of a more open-minded place. Here we go. So to some extent, right, our brains have to integrate audiovisual material to make sense of the world around us. A lot of people don't realize that we listen with our eyes, we listen with touch, we listen in many ways. If you are sensing a warm body temperature coming off of someone, you might sort of instinctively understand that they're anxious. If you are sensing, if you see them fidgeting a lot, you're going to get a different meaning out of what they're saying. You're watching their mouth to see if what you're hearing is correct. I wish this would stop changing on me. So yeah, the other thing is that we hear sounds, we start to form mental images. So I have these two overarching questions, which are like, what types of mental images do we create when we hear voices and why? And what kinds of voices do we imagine people will have when we see them, and why? And how much are these expectations based on implicit or explicit bias, which, you know, is cultural, my God, why is it doing this to me? Which is possibly based on like prior knowledge, culture, etc. So we're gonna watch this video, if it'll play.
You shared the audio.
I did. It just won't play at all. I am having such fun. Nope, no dice.
Oh, because you're not in presentation.
Okay, so how do I get off of this and go to like the normal slideshow? Because this is driving me nuts.
Yeah.
I end and start over?
Well, you don't need to start over, but.
No, I don't mean from the beginning, but I mean, I'm just gonna go to presenter view.
Yeah,
Right?
and close, stop sharing. There it is.
Okay, here it is. Can you all see that? Okay.
Is he coming this way? He's coming this way. He's coming towards us right now. This is good now. Whatever you do, don't fart.
Oh, it started over.
This way? He's coming this way. He's coming towards us right now. This is good now. Whatever you do, don't fart.
Hey, what's up, ladies? Oh, you're from around these.
Well, I think you get the point with just that. I am frustrated though with this. I don't want it to keep flipping on its own.
Okay.
Because it's like, I can't,
Okay, so you
I
want
cannot
to,
deal. I'm sorry.
we have to just stop this.
Yeah, we can just go to the regular old one. I will be fine. Basic. Sometimes basic just feels so good. All right, so now we're gonna do a little activity. So if you have something to write with, great. If you don't, we have some paper here and you can grab one of my pens. This is an activity that kind of intersects two of the projects I did at Timbre 2023. We are involved in a Timbre semantics project where we have people listen to voices, describe them, and we are pulling out the semantic descriptions. And I'm going to take that information later and do some acoustic analysis because I'm really interested in, you know, if people are like, this is a feminine voice or this is a dark voice, what is the acoustic correlate? And then how do you produce that physically with the voice so that I can apply it to my students who want to change their voices for various reasons. But my thesis research is a little bit different. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to some voices, and I want you to ask yourself, who are you picturing when you hear this voice? And feel free to like just jot down something really brief. The samples are 10 seconds long, and I will not play them twice because we don't have time. And then, you know, we'll reveal. I'm not going to ask you to share your answers unless you want to, but and number two.
Cease.
Number three.
Shit, it's just something by when you get the, you know, when you get that AC. Shit, it's just something by when you get the, you know, when you get that AC blowing, man, in them older cars, man. But that one.
Okay, number four.
He saw a apple-shaped, mystically crossed 50 or 60 steps. He saw a apple-shaped, mystically crossed 50 or
Love never Just because me look like this and me move peaceful moral doesn't mean me not go tell you if you go suck out your blood clot mother if you come to me hostile.
And number 8. All right. So I know that was really quick, but it's just kind of a taste of what we do in some of our experiments. And now I can't get it to go to the next screen, which is, so here's the big reveal. The first one was Thomas Quasthoff, who is an operatic baritone. So he doesn't look like the typical baritone, and we don't often see people like that on stage. So she is the voice actress who did the voice of Pazuzu in The Exorcist.
Shit, it's just something about when you get the, when you get that AC blowing, man, in them older cars, man. But that one right there, that 91 Fleetwood, that was, man, I love that car.
So we have Paul Wall, who is a white rapper. Adrian Angelico, who is a trans-masculine opera singer, mezzo-soprano, and indigenous person from Norway, singing. Then we have Mary, who is a young woman with spasmodic dysphonia, which is a disorder of the voice where the chords don't close.
He saw a shape mystically cross 50 or 60 steps in front of his sister Kathy's house.
And it makes you sound old. The 6th sample is Jimmy Scott, who is a R&B singer who had...
Never change. Keep that breathless charm.
And people thought he sounded like a contralto, a woman, his whole life. The 7th sample is
Just
Ghetto
because me look like this and me move peaceful moral doesn't mean me not go tell you if you go suck out your blood clot mother if you come to me hostile.
And finally, Helbjorg Nielsen, who is a cisgender woman with an operatic baritone voice who did a lot of variety shows because back then, you were a woman baritone. So why does any of this matter? Well, basically, exclusion is really harmful. And we are missing out on a bunch of sounds that have always existed, voices that have always been present. Not only have trans people always been present, but as you've seen, we have cisgender women who are baritones. They exist in nature, and yet there is no place for them in the choir, which is the orchestration of voices, right? And what can we do about this? So there's just myriad reasons why I believe this is important. I hope that you will all agree. So I'm going to go really quickly through a bit of terminology here. Fach is this German word that means box or compartment. And this is where we kind of codified these things, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. They existed before the Fach system, but they had a completely different meaning. They were more about the function. So a tenor would be the melody and the soprano would be supra, right? So it was above the melody, but it didn't mean high voice. We ended up with this really fussy system. There are over like 26 voice types, and we still have an ambiguous column in the middle of voices that we can't classify. some gender stuff just for the sake of this presentation. I'm going to be talking about the trans umbrella. So when I say trans, I'm talking about different identities. We have binary trans people, women and men. We also have non-binary people, gender expansive, gender diverse, agender, gender fluid. Trans means people whose gender identity and assigned gender at birth don't match. Cisgender means people whose assigned gender at birth and gender identity do match. And then there are these 5 things: gender presentation, gender identity, legal gender, biological sex, which, by the way, you should not say unless you're in the medical field and you're in the know and you understand what you're talking about, because there are 6 sex markers, not just 1. And endocrinology has a completely different understanding of what that means. And assigned sex at birth, these are all different, and one person could have 5 different things going on in each of those sections. Finally, McGurk effects. This is a perceptual phenomenon, which you probably all know about, but vision and hearing interact, and an illusion happens when the audio of one sound is paired with a visual cue of a second sound, and you perceive a third sound that never happened. And the famous example is Bagada. You can look it up on YouTube, lots of videos if you're interested. So I'll get into the studies really quick. Study 1 investigated how audio-visual integration affects people's judgments of singers and speakers' vocal range and timbre, which are 2 of the core elements of Fach categorization. And what's important is that we had trans people evaluating the stimuli. Usually, if trans people are involved, they're the voice actors in the stimuli, and it's cis people who evaluate the voices for masculinity or femininity. But we flip the model because trans people should be the ones deciding what they want in a voice. It should not be a cisgender standard. So our hypothesis was that because trans people are living with this perceived voice-body dissociation, they might be less influenced by people's appearance than cis listeners when making judgments about voice type. Our participants were matched. We had a cis group and a trans group, all variables except gender identity, and they were 18 to 30 years old. The stimuli were selected from the RAVDES, which was created by another actor member, Frank Russo and Stephen Livingstone. We had 18 actors, 3 from 6 of those voice types. We excluded countertenor because it's a problematic voice type, but also there were no countertenors in the RAVDES. So we had 1 match, and then we had an upward mismatch where the voice sounded lower or darker than the person's face and body looked, and a downward match where the voice sounded higher or brighter than the face indicated. And they evaluated 3 modes: audio only, video only, and AV combo. So it would have looked like this, but there were 144 scrambled stimuli in each block. I'm just going to play this so you would hear.
Kids are talking by the door.
Yes,
Kids are
that this
talking
person was
by
a
the
soprano.
door.
Apologies. Then you saw silent video. People guessed that this was a mezzo.
Kids are
And then
talking by the door.
everything's playing at once. But her rating ended up being dragged towards the visual. So the ratings actually were dragged a third of a step down for this particular actor in the direction of B, which indicates visual bias that led everybody to believe that this singer's voice was actually lower and darker than the audio signal alone would indicate. See, where are we going? We're in the wrong way. So in general, though, the biases were 30% weaker for the trans group than for the cis group. So this is what's really important. They have, the trans community has broken this visual bias that the cis community hasn't, is basically what the exciting result of this study is. And that means that we can train other people to resist the bias, right? So this is what I'm super excited about. There's a fancy chart, which my PowerPoint doesn't want you to look at, but that's okay. The biases were the strongest for sopranos and basses on the extremes, because they're expected to be hyper feminine and hyper masculine is kind of what that indicates. So the second study we're doing is investigating the role of pitch in all of this. In the first experiment, everything was on an F. Here, we have altered the pitch, and we wanted to see if this would cause people to judge the voices as more masculine in the case of lower voices or more feminine in the case of higher voices. And these are altered higher and lower voices. We also wanted to know if trans people would continue to resist the visual bias when pitch was sort of involved in this. Again, we had two groups of matched participants. This was all done on Prolific, by the way, online. And we expanded the age range though, 18 to 70 instead of 18 to 30. It was a different group of participants. And yeah, the one thing that happened is that there were more older cisgender people on Prolific than trans. So we didn't have as many older trans people. The stimuli again is from the RAVDAS, but we use straight to lower the voices by 3 semitones or raise them by 3 semitones. The vocal tract length was not modified though. So the timbre was as close as possible to the original timbre, but at a higher pitch. Then I just reintegrated the sound to the video. So here's what this ended up sounding like. So that's the low.
Dogs are sitting by the door.
Everything is going crazy, I'm sorry. I apologize, but anyways, you all know what a semitone is, right? 3 semitones up, 3 semitones down. So the preliminary results, oh my God. The preliminary results showed that trans listeners in this study did not resist the visual bias as they did in the first study, or rather they did it in a kind of complicated way. What you're seeing here is that there was an effective pitch, and it, as we expected, you know, the lower voices were rated more masculine and the higher voices were rated more feminine. And we are looking for the reasons at this point. So could be a different pool of participants, and that we included like baby boomers and Gen X people who have a very different concept of gender than only millennials and Gen Zs in the first study. We also need to investigate this role of pitch and of course the role of emotion, because our stimuli in the second experiment was more neutral in emotional valence than the first study, where we used more emotional content like happy and sad versus calm. In study 2B, we're investigating the role of timbre or vocal tract length and visual bias. So we're going to repeat the same thing. Now, hopefully these will play for you. I'm so sorry. Here's our lady.
Kids are talking by the door.
I'm going to jump out the window. And here's
kids are talking by the door.
So I hope you can hear the difference. I used Pratt for this one. And what I did is the fundamental frequency and melodic contour remains the same. But the formant spacing is different, and I made the vocal tract length in the second one about a 1.5 centimeters longer. And so the formant spacing and the lower spectral centroid are the things that we think correlate to darkness in a voice. Here we have our bass, who is a match. And then I shortened his.
Kids are talking by the door.
They're both playing at the same time, I'm sorry. All right, so for him, I shortened the vocal tract length by 1 centimeter. And as you can see, the formants are different again. So the second, the modified one, with the higher spectral centroid and the higher formants are going to correlate to what we generally perceive as brightness in a voice. So the future of this is that we want to do another study where we modify both pitch and timbre so that we have matched stimuli where the voice is higher and brighter or lower and darker, but also mismatched ones where we combine high pitch and dark vocal quality with low voice low voice with bright vocal quality to see what happens then. Hopefully we can move to in-person, we can maybe create our own stimuli. We can repeat some of this to see if we get the same results in person as we did online. I need to write my thesis, and I have this quote here, which my computer doesn't want to let me read, by Anne Carson. "It is in large part according to the sounds people make that we judge them sane or insane, male or female, good, evil, trustworthy, depressive, marriageable, moribund, likely or unlikely to make war on us, little better than animals or inspired by God. These judgments happen fast and can be brutal." And I just want to point out that for trans people just walking around in the world, looking feminine or masculine and then opening their mouth and having a different sound come out can result in violence. On the flip side of this, at O.J. Simpson's trial, a key witness was asked if they heard a Black man outside of Nicole Brown's house after the murder, not if they saw a Black man. And I think, I might be wrong, but I think when you heard Paul Wall speaking, lots of people would have said they heard a Black man, but he's white. So this is, to me anyways, very important, because I certainly don't want to get or see a world or have a future where people are getting into trouble based on these kinds of biases. So here are some references. Thank you very much. This was funded by Concordia and SMPC. And thank you to ACTOR and all that stuff. And I'm sorry for the technical issues.
Thanks, ACTOR and CIRMMT, for having me. As Ben said, my research is entitled Choreographing Orchestration, a Novel Method for Analyzing Orchestration Through Ballet. My guiding question is, how does the interaction of choreography with orchestration emphasize the climactic moments in ballet scenes? To begin answering this question, I will first present an overview of previous work. I will share background information about Ravel's Daphnis et Chloé, as its Lever du Jour scene is the case study through which I present my analytical method. Then I will go on to my methodology, results, and a discussion of the work. My methodology guides the prior research that I will mention in 3 categories at the lowest level. My approach considers the ballet scene in 2 parts, its musical content and choreography. I analyze the musical content with score and audio analysis, and analyze the dance with choreographic analysis. Using score analysis, Kit Soden explored orchestration change through how composers use combinations of instruments and musical lines to shape musical transitions. In Lever du Jour, Ravel uses orchestration techniques to gradually depict the climactic moment of the sunrise. Ravel's techniques include alteration of instruments, addition of instruments, and expansion, meaning a broadening out of the orchestral registers. These changes create a climactic timbral effect that is reinforced by the choreography. With audio analysis, there is significant literature devoted to the study of orchestral transformations. Spectral centroid and spectral flux are the most relevant features to my research. Spectral centroid, the center of mass of the sound spectrum, relates to one's perception of sonic brightness. Spectral flux represents the amount of variation of the spectrum over time and links with the stability of the tone. Kara U. Lehman developed a method of choreomusical analysis to capture certain details of the choreography so it can be analyzed alongside the music. Lehman's choreomusical staff has 3 lines. The lines represent positions of the feet, top to bottom, from highest on point to lowest demi-plie. Jumps, lifts, and low bends exist above and below the 3 lines, creating a system of notation to specify the vertical height of the weight-bearing leg. Tuizrar, Gary, and Thompson studied the relationship between bodily expansion and brightness in musical depictions of sunrises and sunsets. They described an expansion metric being the sum of all distances to the centroid, marked in green in the left image. In a study with participants who were asked to move around while listening to Lever du Jour, they identified that the averages of individuals' movements measured through expandedness were closely aligned with audio features such as zero cross and spectral centroid. Thus, there's an experimental precedent that individuals, both trained dancers as well as untrained individuals, move in specific ways near and at the musical climaxes of this scene, different from elsewhere. I investigate a similar question, though with examples of choreographed dance rather than improvised ones. This ballet is the perfect case study because orchestration is a primary parameter in the music, and the score continues to interest choreographers and ballet companies today. Daphnis et Chloé was composed by Maurice Ravel and was completed in 1912. The work was subtitled Symphonie chorégraphique by Ravel and is his longest composition at just under an hour in length. It was commissioned by Sergei Diaghilev in 1909 for Les Ballets Russes and premiered in 1912 at the Théâtre du Châtelet in Paris. The orchestra for this work is large and with 3 to 4 instruments per section in the woodwinds and brass, divisi strings, and a 4-part choir. At musical climaxes, this gave Ravel the flexibility to make large sonic changes. The instrumentation used in the Lever du Jour scene in particular is nearly the full complement of instruments, including choir, permitting dramatic instrumental changes at climactic moments. Daphnis et Chloé was first choreographed by Michel Fokine. Fokine's choreography depicts the pastoral love story between Daphnis, a goatherd, and Chloé, a shepherdess, by Greek writer Longus, written around the 2nd century AD. Unlike many ballets from the early 20th century and before, Fokine's choreography of Daphnis et Chloé did not survive. Photographs of the productions from the 1910s do remain, such as this one here of Fokine himself, but the details of the choreography are not known. Many choreographers have created new versions of the ballet. Sir Frederick Ashton's 1951 version for the Royal Ballet is widely accepted as the definitive version today. Ashton respected Fokine's conception through attention to scenario and score. The choreographic language in Jean-Christophe Maillot's 2010 version for Les Ballets de Monte Carlo leans toward contemporary dance rather than ballet, and in the scene, the dancers wear soft shoes instead of point shoes. This is the only version of the 3 that uses Ravel's Daphnis et Chloé first and second suites as the score rather than the full ballet. Most recently, Benjamin Millepier's 2014 version for the Paris Opera Ballet combines traditional ballet choreography and minimalist costuming with abstract art scenery. Despite the differences between these 3 productions, there are visual similarities as shown here. Each choreographer chose to create a pas de deux, or a double pas de deux in the case of Maillot, for this scene. In this presentation, I will focus my attention on quantitatively analyzing Millepier's choreography, while also discussing some qualitative features of the other choreographies for future quantitative work. As shown earlier, score-based and audio-based analysis address the musical content of how Ravel's orchestration emphasizes the key thematic moments of the scene, whereas choreographic analysis addresses how the 3 choreographies emphasize the key thematic moments of Lever du Jour in different ways. Regarding the musical content of the scene, score-based analysis accounts for the introduction and elimination of instruments, and audio analysis accounts for the sound, intensity, and timbral descriptors. In terms of the choreography, choreo-musical notation and concepts of bodily expansion guide the transcription and analysis of choreographies seen in performance videos. I use Tuisar's formal scheme for the scene in my analysis, and specifically the 4 climactic moments marked with the circled numbers at the left. Let's watch a 2-minute excerpt from the scene from just before Climax 3 to after Climax 4, danced by Aurélie Dupont and Hervé Moreau of the Paris Opera Ballet. To track instrumentation, I created a tally as shown here, with the rows consisting of every individual instrumental part. The time base is 1 beat in this representation, since instrumentation changes from beat to beat. Here's a closer look at the previous slide. If a part was playing during a beat, I put the number 1 in the cell and otherwise left it empty. In cases where a part began or ended in the middle of a beat, I wrote a 1 if the part played during the beat at all. I colored the cells that had 1s in them. I analyzed the audio from the Paris Opera's 2014 production. Using Sonic Visualizer, I graphed Spectral Centroid using VAMP SDK example plugins and Spectral Flux using BBC VAMP plugins. Spectral Centroid is shown in green and Spectral Flux is shown in orange, while Amplitude is shown in blue. I plotted vertical height of the weight-bearing leg for the 2 dancers in the Paris Opera scene, choreographed by Millepied, with measure numbers on the x-axis and the vertical height of the working leg on the y-axis. I chose to adopt Lehman's emphasis on the weight-bearing leg in prioritizing vertical heights. I represent each dancer's vertical height using a set of numbers corresponding to Lehman's staff system, shown at the right, lifted as 5, jumping 4, on point 3, standing 2, demi-plie 1, and kneeling 0. This graph shows instrumental part counts across measure numbers, and the 4 climaxes are marked with vertical black lines. Ravel increases the number of instruments at each climax, with the 4th having the greatest number of individual instrumental parts at a count of 48, as shown here. With audio features, we see a similar profile. For Spectral Centroid, Spectral Flux, and Amplitude, here all normalized between 0 and 1, the climaxes feature local magnitudes in all 3 features, with the 4th climax being the highest across all 3. This means that Ravel uses timbral change by way of orchestration as a signpost for climactic intensity. Aligning the score analysis with the audio analysis, we see how the climaxes exist in the musical content as a whole. The vertical lines shift to account for performance of the score, which is to be expected because of the high number of expressive timing markings during this scene. I interpret the 4th climax to be the most important from the musical content, meaning the score and the audio analysis together. Here, the score analysis is aligned with the choreographic analysis of Millepied's version. The 3 danced climaxes are designed by Millepied in similar ways, with Chloe being lifted by Daphnis for varying durations. Interestingly, unlike my interpretation of the score and audio analysis, I interpret the choreographic depiction as making the penultimate climax the most important because the duration of the lift is the longest, the choreography is slower, and there are greater physical expansions of the body. The choreographer shares control with the composer and the orchestra over how the trajectory of the scene is understood by audiences. Even if the score and the audio emphasize the final climax most, the visual elements of the dance may alter the overall work to experience the penultimate climax as more important. These greater expansions of the body to visually depict climaxes are not unique to Millipier's choreography. In Ashton and Maillot's work as well, we observe the same trend, though through different axes of expansion. So far, my quantitative analysis of the choreography captures the vertical dimension of movement of high versus low, though future work will quantitatively capture other dimensions of expandedness, such as expandedness of limbs, spatial positions on stage, meaning how far or close the dancers are to each other, or speed of movement, fast versus slow, and moving versus still. These images are taken from choreographies by Millipier that we watched at the left, next Maillot, and the two rightmost images from Ashton's choreography. The climaxes are emphasized in each choreography by the choreographer's use of various axes of expansion. In Millipier's version, vertical position and expandedness of limbs indicate climactic moments. Ashton uses vertical position as well as speed of movement, while Maillot's choreography features speed of movement and spatial position as markers of climax. In each version, the choreographer uses choreographic signposts to visually identify the climactic moments, just as Ravel used orchestration techniques to orally signify formal importance. Choreographers, beyond the score and a performance, have the ability to influence the entire artwork and can visually prioritize a climax over that emphasized by the musical content, as Millipier and Maillot do here, emphasizing the third climax rather than the fourth one. In sum, with this approach, we see that the score functions as the original source of the four moments analyzed as climaxes. The score analysis reveals how the climaxes work orchestrationally. The audio analysis looks at how timbre and orchestration information at the climaxes is conveyed through performance, and the choreographic analysis investigates how choreographers use varied axes of movement to visually design climaxes. With this specific case study, Levé du Jour features orchestration as a primary parameter. In this scene, changes in orchestration create a climactic timbral effect reinforced by the choreography. Ballet choreography may emphasize or contradict the strength of climaxes as established through the musical content. With this method and case study together, I aim to begin a conversation about applying quantitative analytical methods to choreography as a visual representation of orchestration. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions and comments. And thanks again to ACTOR and CIRMMT for having me.